good morning, possibly afternoon, maybe evening if you are in Asia or something. Today we're going to talk about how raids are progressing and how Mythic Plus is progressing for the player base, for us. Before that though, we have to talk about the bigger changes that happened in the last couple of days, starting with the MO. What happened in the MO? Well, what happened is that Blizzard attempting to hamper the min-maxing that was being done in the MO, particularly related to the rank 5 Eye of the Jailer debuff. People could just get to rank 5 and then, as I myself recommended everyone multiple times, get to rank 5 and then complete the last step of your weekly quests and the last step of your daily quests into rank 5. Because rank 5 was only stopping you from gaining reputation and Stygia from monsters, not from quests. So, you have to collect 12 ingots, collect 11, wait until rank 5 and then collect the last step, which is going to give you all the attention at the completion of the quest, but you already have rank 5, so you don't care. This was what was being done. Now, with this change, you basically have about 3 minutes as soon as you hit rank 5. The stacks of the debuff from rank 5 will not reset anymore if you go up in Oribos, if you leave and go back in again. So you're basically, if you still want to min-max, you're gonna have to have a timed run to complete all the quests you wanted to complete in time. You can still try. You know, the recommendation is still to get all of the quests just one step away from being completed and then reach rank 5 and try to do them very quickly. So you can still try, people will still try and will still do it, but now it's just being made a little bit harder. Particularly confusing because it happened, you know, well over 2 weeks into the expansion. People are getting closer to Exalted by this point, so the change now seems weird in timing, that's all. Now on to actually important changes that will launch us into the first point of the video, which is raids. There has been, as expected, of course, some tuning, some fixing, and some changes for the raid encounters. Now, what wasn't expectable, whether or not we would have had buffs or nerfs, what we have gotten was basically just a bunch of nerfs. Altimore, Destroyer, Inerva Darkvein, and Sunkill Salvation, as well as Artificer Zymux. Basically, all the lower half of the raid, all the entry-level part of the raid, has gotten nerfed heavily on pretty much most of the abilities, basically. Now, all of these nerfs are reading on normal and heroic difficulties, so we're not quite sure yet if this is actually only applying to normal and heroic and not mythic, or if it is simply not applied to mythic because mythic isn't open. That we don't know. But, nevertheless, with all these changes we have to talk about the raid. What's going on with the raid? If you have heard yourself, if you have watched and read yourself, there is some feeling in the community. The feeling that bosses are harder than expected, bosses are overtuned. Essentially they're doing more damage, they're hitting harder, their mechanics are more unforgiving than expected. Of course, when you say than expected, it means you are comparing them to something. What are you comparing them with? With Uldir from BFA and with Emerald Nightmare from Legion. Those were the two most similar raids to Castle Nathria, not just because they are the first ones, but because they are the ones during the age of Mythic Plus. And the age of delaying the release, delaying the opening of the raids, and then delaying the opening of Mythic even more. So in this age, in this generation of raids, there was the feeling that Castle Nathria was harder. Now, what is going on? I pointed this out a few times before when we talk about this. Loot. There is less loot, fellas. There is no Titan Forging. There is no random procs on sockets on all the gear, just on 5 pieces. There is not gonna be any garrison table mission every week that can give you raid gear for free. There's not going to be a Warfront that's going to give you a piece of gear for free. There is not going to be Mythic Plus with a higher item level than raids, as well as Mythic Plus with a lowered number of loot per key, as well as Mythic Plus that cannot Titan Forge. The raids also have a lowered number of loot pieces, and there is no bonus rolls. This totals to not the raid being harder, but you having less gear, therefore being weaker. Therefore, yes, the raid being harder, but not because it's harder by itself, it's simply because we are just weaker. I distinctly remember, for example, when we started Uldir in BFA, the item level for heroic was 370. Me, after clearing normal and after doing a couple of days of Mythic Plus, I was 361 item level, and Uldir heroic dropped 370. Now, compared to heroic Castle Nathria, I am well over 20 item levels lower. And if you consider that the last 2 bosses have 7 item levels higher drop, have 7 higher item level from their loot, I'm nearing 30 item level lower. Not 9, like in Uldir, So there is a clear, more challenging situation here, but not because the raid is harder by itself, it's simply because, finally, heroic raiding has gone back to being actually difficult. This is something I always lamented when it came to Mythic Plus. I am a big fan of Mythic Plus and what allows players to do, what allows players to enjoy PvE without the need of having to find a group of, 15, 20, 25 people to do heroic with, or 20 or more to do Mythic. 5 people, it's a shorter, it's a smaller group, a tight-knit group. It's much easier to do in terms of organization, right? But the benefit of Mythic Plus was going to create a problem for heroic raiding, right? It was going to bypass heroic raiding. It was going to make heroic raiding obsolete. It was going to create situations where you could just spam Mythic Plus and get better gear than heroic raiding. Heroic raiding for the past couple of expansions became the type of difficulty, the type of raid difficulty where you just go into to snipe a particular trinket, maybe a particular weapon or a particular ring, but that was it. The rest you would get from Mythic Plus, because it was similar or item level higher than heroic raiding, and you just had way more chances at a Titan Forge in Mythic Plus than you were in heroic raiding. But now this is no longer the case. Not only there is no Titan Forging, Mythic Plus now drops lower item level than heroic as a base. Heroic caps at 213, Mythic Plus caps at 210. Not to mention, the last 2 bosses of heroic are gonna cap at 220. So heroic raiding will remain relevant for much longer. This obviously also means that heroic raiding will become harder, because with the higher item level, it also comes higher difficulty. Because you can't just weaken, you can't just trivialize heroic by spamming Mythic Plus anymore. I don't know fully how I feel about this, because this is also making Mythic Plus weaker. Like, on all accounts. People who want to continue climbing in Mythic Plus, I mentioned these happy-going group of 5 friends that want to do Mythic Plus. It's gonna be fine, it's gonna be all roses until you start reaching plus 14, plus 15, plus 16 keys, and Mythic Plus gear is not gonna cut it anymore. You will have to start doing something like Mythic raiding, and if you don't do Mythic raiding, then you have to wait every week your cache, your great vault that is going to give you a piece of mythic loot, mythic item level loot, 226. So this version, this change is making heroic raiding much more valuable. It's going to keep heroic raiding more, I don't want to say mandatory, but it's going to keep it more relevant for raiders, and it's going to keep it more relevant for Mythic Plus players for much longer than previous expansions. The result, though, is that people who don't want to raid, people who don't want to do heroic, and of course also don't do Mythic, are going to be hurt more. So, tell me what you guys think about this point right here, about heroic raiding being better than before, being more relevant than before. I don't think it's that bad when you consider that there is way more people, of course, doing heroic raiding than there are doing Mythic raiding, right? So making heroic raiding more relevant is going to benefit a lot of people. It's going to allow a lot of people to get more, get more satisfaction from doing heroic, get more accomplishments and achievements from doing heroic raiding, as opposed to before being just a joke. I'm not sure just how badly it is going to impact the Mythic Plus player base. I'm not sure how many people from the Mythic Plus player base don't even want to do or didn't even do heroic raiding to begin with. So let me know, I will start counting and we will see. Now, as for the raid itself, since I went into it yesterday, so for me particularly, it was kind of a clusterfuck, not gonna lie. We went in normal first, we cleared all normal, we wiped, 3 or 4 times to the first mechanics, and then overall the raid went pretty smoothly. I went digressing over time, it started really well, and then towards the end it was just... I got baited multiple times by my new trinket. I was spending more time trying to get those fucking images on the ground rather than actually paying attention to stuff. That was fun. I also realized that spending 2 weeks doing Mythic Zeros with the Resto Shaman, and then starting doing Mythic Plus with the Resto Shaman, and then jumping into raiding, changing my talents with a new trinket, playing Elemental for the first time in 2 weeks, probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, I admit. But, however, the raid seems very cool. It is the coolest raid I have seen, at least compared to BFA. I think Battle of the Zara lore was pretty good when it came to boss encounters, but however, I am pretty happy with the way Custom Nathria bosses are looking. I didn't have a chances to look at a few of them from the beta, as well as the completed fight. I am a fan of the Inerva Darkvein container mechanics, of the Artificial Zymox teleport minigame you will have to do. I'm also, as a boomer, of course, I'm a big fan of Sludgefist and big, old, simple DPS checks, as well as I think the Nathrius is one of the coolest fights we have seen in recent times. I really want to see it in Mythic, how cool it's gonna be. Question about Stone Legion generals. Since literally as of right now, less than probably 30 people have gotten to do this in Heroic, in normal it's a joke. In normal it's very underwhelming. Trying it in the beta, in Heroic, as well as looking at the Mythic raiding mechanics, this is going to be much tougher and much, I think, entertaining when it comes to the harder difficulties. Right now it's pretty underwhelming when you look at normal and you cut some of the key mechanics, particularly the fact that you will have to fight them together, not just one at a time, at least in terms of the mechanics that will be thrown at you. But in general, when it comes to raiding, I'm a pretty big fan. I enjoy the raid, I enjoy the aesthetics as well. Now, as a preliminary look, as a very early, very preliminary look, not meaning too much, this is the current performance from normal raids so far, as well as the current performance from Heroic raiding so far. We see that we have some very clear similarities with Unholy Death Knight, Shadow Priest, Marksmanship Hunter, Affliction Warlock, Subtlety Rogue, Balanced Druid, Elemental Shaman, all very high, as most of them were predicted. I think Elemental Shaman is also there because most Elemental Shamans are not playing with the best legendary at their disposal, which is gonna come from a world boss, as I mentioned. God knows when the fuck that's gonna happen. They are instead playing with a padding legendary because it's the second best. They are playing with Echoes of Great Sundering, which is of course empowering your Earthquake, meaning it's gonna be bound to get much higher overall damage. Reason why it's higher than expected. Now, for people for people who don't know how Warcraft log looks, you see how long these lines are. This minimum and maximum lines. You see how completely unreliable it is. How much of a swing there can be between the bad and the good. Between an average performance, a good performance, and a bad performance. This is of course because normal and heroic are pretty entry level. Everyone is trying them. People completely clueless, people extremely good. So you get these extremely wide swings of performances. So you can sort of take a guess that probably things like Havoc Demon Hunter probably not going to outperform a Subtlety Rogue, or a Demonology Warlock not going to outperform an Affliction Warlock. These are the things you can start of getting from these first logs. But of course we have to wait a few more logs, a few more numbers, a few more chunks of data to get some definitive results. Now, as for raiding, let's take a pause and let's go and look at Mythic Plus for a bit. So when you look at the currently highest keys in Mythic Plus, this is what you see. I'll even give you a second page, just because. This is what you see. What you're seeing is a predominance at the higher keys of, unsurprisingly, Vengeance Demon Hunter, followed by Restoration Shaman, followed by the triptych, the trio, the three amigos of Mage, Hunter and Rogue. This was predicted a few days ago, but I will not take any credit because it was extremely simple and very easy to expect. Early expansion Vengeance is just doing too much damage with the amount of utility as well it can bring to miss out on. Marksmanship Hunter at the moment just has too much burst, too much front-loaded burst with their combo I already mentioned, which, as I mentioned exactly for this very same reason, is it gonna be nerfed? Should it be nerfed? More importantly, how should it be nerfed? Should Wild Spirits be touched? And so on. And then of course you have Mage. As I mentioned, another thing I'm pretty happy about, not just a complete dominance of Fire Mages. There are gonna be Fire Mages and Frost Mages at the higher keys so far, rather well split. There seems to be a more popularity of Frost Mage in general and more Fire Mages at the higher keys. Then again, talking about higher keys right now, when there is less than 20 plus 15s completed, just like for raids, the numbers are too small to make definitive points. Now when you look at the actual popularity, now we have almost 140,000 samples for tanks. There is the expected popularity of Paladin and Vengeance and the less popular Warrior and Druid. I think it is also expected that Brewmaster isn't as popular right now. I mentioned it's going to be popular in the first season, but we are at the start of the first season, and at the start of the first season what matters is damage. At the start of the first season you don't need to be as defensive as a Brewmaster Monk, maybe even not as defensive as a Guardian Druid. At the start of the first season you want to go YOLO, full damage, and the two specs with the full damage are Vengeance and Prot Paladin, and they are the most played. Then of course remember that even while being less played than Paladin, Vengeance is pretty much the only tank being played at the higher keys right now. To find the first Prot Paladin, you need to go through 39 Vengeance Demon Hunter tanks. That's the state right now. Then when we go to Healer, this is also not very surprising. Over 50% of all keys have gotten a Druid or a Shaman in their group. And also, as mentioned before, the most popular pick for the highest keys is Vengeance Resto Shaman. Very, very good synergy together. What is also kind of surprising, I didn't foresee this, is the fact that while Discipline Priest is pretty popular, there seems to be a rebellion going on in Priest where there is quite a few Holy Priests, actually, rising up. At lower keys, it's literally just irrelevant. So I'm mentioning it just because, but it's nice to see. Now this is where you also have to start taking into account the entire class, because you can only play Mythic Plus as one spec, most likely. You will get your first legendary and you will play with that legendary, so here you also start seeing some specs being lower populated, lower played, because other specs of the same class are more popular and they are played more. For example, you can see that Holy Paladin is pretty low in popularity, but you just saw that Prot Paladin is almost 30% of all tanks and Ret Paladin is 13%, fighting even with Subtlety and Unholy to be the more popular melee. So, of course, Holy Paladin is bound to be less popular. Same can be said for Enhancement. When Restoration is so popular and Enhancement doesn't have a good, rep to begin with, it's much easier to sneak into groups as a Resto Shaman, right? For melee, we have some expectation being confirmed. We have Unholy and we have Subtlety being the more popular. Outlaw, as a result, of course, suffers a little bit more because Subtlety becomes so popular, obviously. We have Survival, Feral, Windwalker, and Enhancement being less popular. Red Paladin was one of the specs I mentioned, could have been pretty good. The surprise here, though, is Havoc, because it doesn't follow the script. It's not following the pattern. Vengeance Demon Hunter is pretty popular, yes, but there are still quite a few Havoc players. Now, obviously, Havoc is much better in Mythic Plus than it is in Raids. Their capability of AoE is much more powerful than their capability for single target or cleave, compared to Mythic Plus, where they have also quite a few talents to do heavy AoE. They still have things like an immunity, they still have things like an offensive dispel, an AoE stun, and a plethora of things to use in Mythic Plus, which is very valuable, so it is still gonna be a decent pick. But it's just surprising. I didn't expect him to be this high when you consider the popularity of Vengeance. As for Warriors, the popularity is there, not because it's strong. Even if it was, the popularity is there because Protection Warrior is the least played tank, and Warrior is a pretty popular class. Most raiding guilds are gonna have at least one Warrior in the group. Just because of Shout and just because of Rallying Cry and because of their Condemn and Execute phase, which is also very powerful. So you have to do Mythic Plus. You can't play Prot Warrior. What do you play? You play DPS. That's why they are pretty popular right now. In fact, if you make Arms and Warrior together as a class, they are the most popular class together with Rogue. Now, we have some other expected results. We have the Mages. Even just Frost Mage alone is the third most popular spec. And this doesn't even take into account Fire and Arcane. Then of course you have Hunter. I am very happy about having predicted this. I knew that Marksmanship would have been much better than Beast Mastery. I knew it would have been much more useful for Mythic Plus. When you go into a big pool, you have your Wild Spirits, your True Shot, your Double Tap, your Trick Shots. Very, very powerful. But I still said BM Hunter would have been very highly played. Because Hunters have something wrong in the brain. Beast Mastery has done something to them. They're just gonna play Beast Mastery regardless of the state of Beast Mastery compared to Marksmanship, so this is the result. Beast Mastery is still very popular. What is also expected is the popularity of Shadow Priest. Very expected. Warlock was gonna be here because similar discussion for Warrior. Warlocks are popular in Raids. It's a popular class. They have to go and do Mythic Plus, right? Even if it was terrible, even if Warlock was terrible, they still had to be here, showing up in decent percentages because they are played. At lower keys, this is going to be the result. We'll have to see at higher keys if they will still be used. Now, Balanced Druid is still performing rather well. Their strength in single target and in raids is very, very good. They are amongst the better performance. However, we still have to mention that Guardian Druid has a little over 10% popularity for tanks. Resto Druid has over 30% popularity for healers. So it's still pretty telling that despite those rather used specs, Balance is still pretty used. And then of course you have Elemental Shaman at the bottom. Pretty much one of the lower played specs for ranged as a whole. Of all specs, only beating Demonology and Arcane. This is also somewhat similar to the Resto Shaman problem. Restoration Shaman is very popular right now, so why would you go and do Mythic Plus as an Elemental? It's literally what I am doing, even if I am an Elemental Shaman. I'm playing Resto in Mythic Plus. So this is also part of the reason why this is so low. Now, closing this popularity update for Mythic Plus, we still have to mention that we are really early on in the keys, we are really early on in the tier. There is going to be more tuning coming for dungeons and for raids, and very likely there's going to be a balance tuning for classes and specs. So that's what we're looking for by the end of this week. or the start of the next week. There is a possibility, by the way, that Blizzard is going to let the world first race of Mythic raiding complete before they go into any tuning passes. They've done this before. They have waited, considering it's only going to take, in general, a week, 10 days maybe, at the most a couple of weeks to clear the entire raid. So Blizzard is saying, well, the first tier is going to last 5 months, 4 months. Even if we wait 2 weeks for a balance pass, for 99.99% of the population of the game is not going to matter. So that's a possibility. We will have to see. So for now, this is where we stop with our updates on Mythic Plus and raiding. Tomorrow we'll see what we have gotten after the second day, the full second day of raiding and some more Mythic Plus. Then tomorrow we'll also talk about some things like Torghast, like the 4th, 5th and 6th layer. How's that been going? Maybe we will touch on some legendary crafting, what choices have been made. But for now, I'll leave. I have to go back doing my daily chores on my character. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, am I losing my voice?